America likes a bad boy, a rebel, a lawbreaker. Dick Cheney was all of those things, but nobody likes Dick Cheney. In the early 2000s, in the aftermath of 9/11, the United States, in coalition with the United Kingdom, went to war against terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. Based off of intelligence we now know, was highly suspect. Vice is about the man who ignited this war. Vice President Dick Cheney. It's the follow-up feature to The Big Short, written and directed by Adam Mckay, who is best known for his comedy work, writing and directing Stepbrothers, The Other Guys, Anchorman. Basically just pick any Will Ferrell movie. So, when The Big Short came out in 2015, and it was a huge hit with critics, audiences, and awards, everyone was kind of taken aback because it was a fast-paced, funny, sexy kind of ride about the people who made a huge amount of money by predicting the 2008 financial crash. It was, at the same time, a hilarious study of how the crash happened, and a scathing critique of the system that caused it. But the movie succeeded because of the main characters being relatable, warm, and just as outraged as you are watching the film. It's a huge testament to the film, and Mckay especially, that these people who were driven by financial benefit were so empathetic, apart from Ryan Gosling's character, who was this love-to-hate smug arsehole who just stole every scene he was in. But while The Big Short lets his main characters off the hook in the end of the film, and the only moral redemption comes from a great Brad Pitt performance, and from Steve Carell's hedge fund manager right at the end of the film, Vice absolutely does not. Every single character in this film is wholly unlikable and despicable. Even humanizing moments from Cheney are later rolled back and undone. Mckay doesn't really want these characters to be likable. I don't think. So let's roll it back. The film takes us on Dick Cheney's journey from Yale dropout turned labourer to the most powerful man in America. Christian Bale gives a terrific performance as Cheney, who at the beginning of the film is pressured by his wife, Lynn Cheney, played by Amy Adams, to return to school after a drunk driving incident landed him in jail. After becoming a White House intern for Donald Rumsfeld, played by Steve Carell, he quickly climbs up the political ladder as a strong, contemplative, quiet worker. There's a really touching scene where he's given his first office inside the White House and calls his wife and kids, welling up and reflecting on his success, where he's come from and where he is now. But this is one of the only touching moments of the movie. The rest plays as a really strong critique of Cheney, his wife, his associates, his boss, George W. Bush, which is terrifically performed by Sam Rockwell. The film many times takes aim at the beginning of the film specifically at Lynn Cheney, his wife, painting her as an orchestrator and a much more nefarious figure than even Dick Cheney himself, sidelined by the glass ceiling for women in politics, and looking to exact her revenge. In contrast, there are times when the film tries to let you relate to Dick. His aforementioned pride at receiving his first office, his friendship with Donald Rumsfeld, his boss and mentor, and the supportive nature when his daughter comes out as lesbian to him. In contrast, Lynn Cheney is much more cold, offering only, "This will make things much harder for you," and it's unclear whether she's talking about her husband's political career or her daughter's feelings and the rest of her life. But when the film gets to its final act, the question of who is actually the evil figure becomes much less blurred. We don't ever hear Lynn's views on the Iraq War or the corruption inside the administration, and instead she returns to the position of the concerned wife, which is common in these films. Instead, the film attacks Dick Cheney, his motivations for war, and his notorious dealings with Halliburton, the oil field company for which he was the CEO before returning to politics to be vice president. Halliburton profited immensely off the Iraq War, and by extension of stock ownership, so did Dick Cheney. It also attacks Cheney's lust for power, trying to show just how desperate he was for control, executing every single legal option he could to take power as vice president and sideline George Bush. By the end of the film, you have no doubt in your mind over who Dick Cheney is, what he represents, and why he did what he did. This is a credit to the film and to Bale, but a Frank Underwood-esque House of Cards kind of fourth wall break in the 11th hour tries to throw a curveball in that and gives Cheney a chance to explain himself. I'm just kind of sat there thinking though, like, yeah, okay, you care about the families and the security, but the film just showed us why this isn't true. It shows us that you're lying right now. I didn't have any trust for Dick Cheney before I saw the film, and I definitely didn't have any trust you know, as he's giving this monologue about why I should trust him. It attempts to humanize Dick at the beginning, and it worked. It's successful at the beginning of the film before you see everything else. I didn't know about Dick Cheney's daughter and his kind of relationship with that, and I was genuinely warming to him at points like this, but by the end they seem entirely pointless. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, like, to see his decline in his morality. But the weird monologue at the end, the fourth wall break, just doesn't make any sense. It feels like it's trying to remind you of this humanity. In the end, it's really unnecessary, and it kind of bothered me. Structurally and stylistically, the film shares a lot with The Big Short, McKay's previous film. And I don't know if this was McKay trying to kind of repeat the groove he found with The Big Short, or whether it's the studio pressuring him to make a similar follow-up to that movie. I assume it was McKay's choice, and the film pushes these ideas to another level. There's the return of a mysterious narrator, this time played by Jesse Plemons rather than Ryan Gosling, but the mystery remains for a lot longer this time, and honestly it feels more like a convenient plot device than actually a clever way of telling the story. They are obviously both films about huge events in our recent history, telling a story that we didn't know, and guiding us through its complexities. The script itself is razor sharp without ever being overwhelming, which a film like this really could be. Much like The Big Short, this is a credit to McKay's writing. This film doesn't come across as overwhelming and complicated. There are also the familiar quick flashes of related but disparate images, this time showing war zones and political dealings rather than the excess wealth and housing peril of The Big Short. The quick cutting, overlapping audio also returns, and is similarly effective in creating this chaotic, fast-paced atmosphere. The editing has been criticised by a lot of people, especially since it was nominated for Best Editing at the Oscars, but I found it effective as it was in The Big Short, and I thought that the quick moving around the timeline did also add to the story. However, if this is something that you didn't like in The Big Short, then you won't find anything new here. Overall, I think the decision to keep with the same style does work here. The cutting and editing keeps the story lively and suspenseful. It's ultimately a film about politicians talking to each other, so adding this element of quick editing and sharpness I think does add to the film. You know, you can kind of ask, do you prefer Margin Call or The Big Short? And if you preferred Margin Call, then I don't think this film is for you. However, having said that, there were times when I think it doesn't serve the film well, where the images in The Big Short were explicit and straightforward and bold, and Vice they're more subtle, exploring themes not only of the politics and the story, but of Dick Cheney's own personal character, which I think doesn't necessarily suit the style as well. Before you can even digest the metaphor the images are trying to give you, it's gone. Whereas in The Big Short, it was just flashing images of money and houses and stuff that pushed the point to the next level. I mean, the film should be reviewed on its own merits, but it's hard to separate the two movies because of the massive similarities they have. But the big difference between The Big Short and Vice is this. In The Big Short, you're introduced to characters who you shouldn't relate to, but in the end, you want them to succeed. And when they do, the film leaves you dealing with the severe consequences of that success on everyone else. Vice, on the other hand, introduces you to characters we already knew were corrupt, and assumed to be evil and untrustworthy. And then through the course of the film, it entirely reaffirms our previous beliefs that they were evil and untrustworthy, despite certain efforts to humanize the character. The film does this really well. It's funny, it's engaging, it's full of big themes. I really enjoyed it. But it still has its issues, and trying to replicate The Big Short, I think, is the biggest one. The film wants you to empathize with the people who were hurt by Dick Cheney, but it's not about them. It's about Dick Cheney, and no one likes Dick Cheney. So overall positives, I think the writing is amazing, the performances are fantastic across the board, it's funny, it's engaging. However, some of the paths it takes are questionable narratively, and it's not always clear what the film wants to try to tell us. Its metaphors and themes get crossed quite a lot, and it's not as explicit as The Big Short. In its effort to follow up The Big Short, I think it feels a bit too much like The Big Short. Overall, I give it 3.5 stars out of 5, and I would definitely recommend it to people who like The Big Short. If you thought that The Big Short was too fast and hard to follow, then I don't think you'd find much enjoyment here. But I really enjoyed it. Cool. Thank you.